Cold Case, an Angelica Dale mystery by P.K. Armstrong. Chapter 22. Driving back towards the Rolands, I knew I was on the right track. I wanted to talk to Daniel about the pager data. Derek and Sasha worked together, but that would only account for so many pages between them. Hopefully, Terry would get back to me soon. Financial data was another way of proving an affair. Once I had enough to imply an affair, I would confront Moira. The late afternoon sky had darkened prematurely. The snow had begun to fall, and after pulling in front of the house, I sat in my car enchanted by the transformation of the Rolands neighborhood. The houses took on an ethereal quality, and the trees looked like giants draped in gossamer. I rolled down my window and reveled in the silence. Whatever sound that reached my ears seemed to be wrapped in pillows. The lights bounced off every surface that had iced over, and I was tempted to sit outside until everything was covered with a light dusting. But I didn't have time. I still had to organize my thoughts on how to approach Moira Adams' interview. I entered the house and was immediately accosted by Daniel, eager for me to see his results. Daniel Roland could be quiet, like Christopher, but I could imagine the antics he got into as a child, more than likely instigated by Jacob. He was just as handsome as his brothers, and, according to Christopher, he was the smartest. He started tinkering with tech when he was 10, taking apart everything in the house that had a motherboard. I went to his room, the largest bedroom in the house after the master by family consensus. Daniel's room doubled as a work area. Besides his bed, the long wall of his room held a full but organized work table. Well-ordered monitors, drives, cords, and tools were set in their respective places. In the center, in front of the rotating stool, was a desk pad with Derek's pager, soldering tools, and a small black box with cords. Although I was surprised by the ordered clutter, I was more surprised by a large reading chair which sat in the corner of his room. There were software, PC, and other tech magazines on the side table, as well as a new best-selling sci-fi novel. I didn't know you were a reader. Daniel nodded. Sure, when I have time. He hesitated. I write a little too. No way, I said, genuinely surprised. I recovered quickly, not wanting to discourage him. Sci-fi? I asked, motioning to the novel. Yeah, nothing alien, but end of the world genre. Nice. I'd love to read some of your work sometime. Really? Yes, really. We smiled at each other for a second, and then Daniel remembered why I was there. He motioned to the table. Come see what I have for you. He picked up the black box and plugged one cord into the pager and another into an external drive, which was connected to his laptop. So your friend's program worked? Daniel nodded. Better than I expected. He pulled up a task screen that had several columns of data. He explained. Some pagers in the 80s utilized an alphanumeric display that allowed for 28 characters. The device would normally only display the last 10 messages. 20 messages between coworkers probably won't be enough to prove a conspiracy. Daniel gave me a grin so much like Christopher's I paused. Yeah, but fortunately for you or your investigation, the company that manufactured this pager was taking over a large share of the market because they were providing additional storage. 90 days of saved messages. They created a little chip, quite advanced for the 80s, that would store text messages for up to 90 days. Then their servers would call the pager and download those 90 days of information for which a customer could always contact them and request access. Of course, there is no way those servers exist today, and I doubt anyone kept the information. More importantly for you, the company's server hadn't called the pager to download the 90 days of data, so it is still on the pager. Greg's software was able to extract it. Here are the dates. He pointed to a column. And this next column is the sending number. The final column is the message. He glanced at me a little embarrassed, and I leaned in to read some of the messages. Ooh, the words are a little explicit, aren't they? Yeah, I had to look some of them up, Daniel admitted frankly. I cracked up, and it took me a moment to regain my composure. Can you export that to a spreadsheet and email it to me? No problem. Thanks. I straightened up and moved towards the door. I turned just before I opened it. Daniel, I really would like to see your writing. Daniel looked around at me and smiled. I smiled back, turned, and exited the room. I decided I would cook dinner again. To combat the cold temperature, I decided on a southern-style chili with cornbread. I also decided to make a peach cobbler since the Roland household always had vanilla ice cream. I had just finished sautéing onions when Sandy came into the kitchen. She took in the ingredients at a glance, washed her hands, and reached in a low cabinet for a large cast iron skillet. She put it to warm and then reached in the refrigerator and retrieved the ground beef. You do remember we aren't expecting you to cook. I gave her a small smile. But thank you, she whispered and gave me a loving slap on my bum. We cooked in companionable silence until all the ingredients were simmering in the skillet. I started to make the pastry crumble when Sandy finally spoke. So, do I want to know how the investigation is going? I nodded as I poured the batter over the peaches. Really well. I'm working off the theory that Derek and one of his employees plan to burn the club down for an insurance payout. I have an accountant looking into the bank statements and insurance policies. Also, Daniel was able to retrieve some messages so I can look closer at the relationships between the staff. Sandy tested the cornbread and removed it from the oven. She tossed the oven mitt on the counter and sighed. Chuck thinks I should prepare myself in case you find something that proves Stormie is guilty. I slipped my cobbler into the oven. It is wise advice, not because I think Stormie is guilty, but because sometimes investigations bring out secrets, some pertinent to the case and some not. By the time it is complete, we know more about a person than we or they ever thought we could. Sometimes it isn't very flattering. Sandy nodded and then hugged me like a mom. I hugged her back like a child because in that moment I was missing my mom more than anything else. Dinner was delicious, if I do say so myself, and lively. Everyone was impressed with Daniel's data retrieval. Son, Chuck said thoughtfully, if that tool was useful to Angel's investigation, wouldn't it be useful to law enforcement working cold cases? Daniel shrugged. I don't know, maybe. I thought for a moment. I agree with your dad. If it is recent tech, the lab will power on the device, discover the carrier, and they submit a subpoena for the data. But even they often hit a brick wall when dealing with damaged devices. It is Greg's program, Daniel protested. Yeah, but didn't you say you had to tweak it? I argued gently. I had to build a switch that would allow the program to communicate with the pager and the pager to perform the data dump. I had to override a security measure put in place by the company that would only allow the pager to download the information to their servers with a special code. Sandy tapped the table. Chuck, what about your friend Sid, that patent guy that you knew that used to work with the government? Do you think he could sit down with the boys and help them prepare something? I love how Chuck and Sandy supported all their boys' endeavors, gave them a nudge if they needed a little motivation, and then cheered them on to try their hardest. Chuck nodded vigorously. I think so. Daniel, do you think Greg would be interested? Daniel considered a moment. I think so. I'll ask him. Do you track your steps when you do stuff like that? That way you will know what you contributed to the final product? Everyone stopped and stared at Jacob's wisdom. Hey, I know things. More and more artists have to make sure their work, whether actual or digital, is protected and licensed properly. Sandy leaned over and patted his arm. My smart boy. They all laughed at her endearment. I got up to serve cobbler and ice cream. Let me help. Sandy started to rise. No, you sit. I want to serve all of you, I said firmly. I dished up and placed a serving in front of each of them. I want to thank all of you. You've each contributed to my investigation. I don't know if you are aware of this, but at home, my mom, dad, and Christopher each help me, sometimes just to talk things out. It's been nice having the support even though I'm away from home. You are very welcome. You are welcome, Chuck and Sandy said simultaneously. It feels good to be an important part of the investigative team, Jacob said in an authoritative manner with his chest puffed out. Everyone laughed and finished their dessert.